Hello, everyone. Hello, Keith. Hello, Cecilia. We'll start in a moment.
Wait, screen is black, sorry.
Okay, so since it's the top of the hour, I would say we should get started. So, hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Kuhn. I'm Sakai Vice President for Finance, he, him, and I'll be moderating today's meeting. Before we get started, I wanted to just quickly point everybody to the code of conduct, which I can quickly put into the chat as a link. And I think by now, having spent a lot of time online and in various meetings, I think we're familiar with various types of code of conduct issues. But I think that the key point I would like to make about this is that we all should be patient with one another and give each other the benefit of the doubt as we discuss potentially difficult issues. And if you have any concerns whatsoever, then please reach out to either me or one of the other AC members, and we'd be happy to help you. So with that, what I would like to do is get started with pandemic preparedness at Sakai events. And our very own Stacy Branham will take over from here. Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, I'm Stacy Branham. I'm the AC for accessibility on the executive committee. And in that role, I advocate for the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of our community. And one of the issues that's been really important to us the past couple of years has been the global pandemic and the health of our community members. And that's been a particularly important issue for people with disabilities for whom the stakes are generally much higher. So over the past several months, sort of informally, I've led several conversations within the executive committee about our COVID safety within our events. And so I think that that's why Neha has tapped me on the shoulder to kind of guide this conversation. But I do want to point out that this is an important topic that intersects the roles of many of the other members of the EC, and we've all been collectively having these discussions. So we just have a few minutes to discuss this. I'm going to take the first few to give you a bit of an overview, some context, and the current initiatives of the executive committee. And then we'll have 3 to 5 minutes. There's a few people joining us in the meeting today to solicit your feedback and input and to address any questions that you might have. So starting with some context, during the early days of the pandemic, if any of us can actually remember back that far, amidst global travel restrictions and the absence of vaccines, SIGCHI supported its conferences financially as they chose to move online or postpone their meetings. And now over the past several months, we've seen a kind of an opening up of the world. And we're seeking new ways to kind of support our conferences as they start to hold on-premise or on-site conferences, as well as virtual and hybrid meetings. So we want to try to support them with some guidance. And we're receiving some guidance and restrictions also from the ACM. Okay, so many of you on the call today probably are aware that our recent CHI 22 meeting, following that, there were many people who contracted COVID-19, even though the conference required masking and required vaccination. CHI is just one of the 26 conferences that are sponsored by SIGCHI. And so I want to draw our attention to the fact that we actually have 17 more conferences that are being held this year. And of these, at least 10 of them are currently at least 12 of them are currently planning to have some in-person or on-site component. And at least 12 of these currently do not have any kind of guidance or recommendation or requirement for vaccines, for masking, for testing, et cetera. So what we really like to do, the way that we're thinking about CHI 22 is what can we learn from that conference, and how can we then take that learning forward to support our upcoming 17 conferences this year and then the 26 we host every year. And I want to just point out that we should appreciate the kind of complexity and of the task that is ahead for our conference organizers. This is an extremely complex issue. So many of you already know that my personal stance is that we should not be holding in-person meetings at this time, but I have to acknowledge that there's no black and white solution here. So just as one example, regarding inclusion of people with disabilities at our events, of course, many people with disabilities are immunocompromised and they're at higher risk for severe illness, even death. But for some people with disabilities who are neurodivergent, actually in-person meetings or on-site meetings are imperative for their access. Thinking about global inclusion as another issue, while in some parts of the world, anyone who wants a vaccine has had ample time and resources to access it, and even booster shots, globally, many people do not have access to vaccines or effective vaccines. And similarly, while many citizens of many countries have kind of the ability to freely move and within their country and even overseas, that luxury is not available to citizens of all countries who may face travel restrictions, either leaving their country or returning to their country after getting sick abroad. And just one more thing I want to point out is that even if we all come to some agreement about what the right kind of policies or recommendations or kind of supports are for our conference organizers, we have to think about the legal landscape. What can we legally do? ACM is headquartered in the United States, but of course we're a global organization and there are many different kind of legal policies that will constrain what we can do. Okay, so given all that backdrop, this that we have many conferences we're trying to support of many different sizes and formats, and that this is an extremely complex issue that needs really creative thinking from people with multiple expertise. I just want to talk about what the executive committee has been doing to try to support pandemic preparedness for the community. So the first thing is that the EC leadership has met with the Chi-22 organizers who have generously shared what they've learned through their experience with us, and they've also been analyzing the post Chi-22 survey results. The second thing is that we're developing, currently it's an internal document that outlines various supports that the executive committee might provide to our conference organizers. So for example, we could deliver free masks and antigen tests to conference sites, or we could require that conferences have at least some virtual component to their conference to provide access, or we could provide examples of written templates for communicating about COVID policies or practices to conference attendees for websites, emails, et cetera. So we're thinking through what supports we might provide. And the third thing is that we're planning to present a set of these potential supports at the next CSCC meeting. That's the Conference for Steering Committee Chairs meeting. That's going to be happening at the end of the month. And we're going to solicit input from our conference organizers to help us identify high priority items and see what we can take immediate action on versus kind of longer term action on. So I'm going to wrap up my comments here. I just wanted to give you some context and tell you about our current activities. But really, we'd like to take the next couple minutes, if we have time, Andrew, to see if there's anything that the audience would like to share with us. I have a question that I could use to prompt us, but certainly any feedback or questions are welcome. So my question to you is, what steps shall we take in the immediate, medium, and long term to ensure that our conferences are COVID prepared? And then I'll leave it to the audience. Please raise your hand or add a question in the chat, and we'd be happy to try to address it.
Thank you, Stacy. And yes, while people are considering their questions, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'd be happy to call on you now. And we will also have time at the end of the meeting, which is at 30 past the hour, for some more discussion. And finally, as Stacy mentioned, happy to continue the discussion in the chat. So if there are any questions. Well, there's certainly, so thank you, Stacy, for sharing it. We take this very seriously. We're glad that we're able to learn from the conferences that are charging ahead and showing us the way to go. And I guess we'll continue with that. And clearly this is something that we will solicit input on for sure.
Yes, and Andrew, I'll just say I put some email addresses in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us at any time.
Thank you. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Oh, here we go. Keith, would you like to read it?
No,
Or
just
I can read it. Go ahead.
just making a comment that I will have to think about it some more. These are deep, hard questions. This wasn't, I was just showing up to listen in. So I obviously didn't do any homework. So that's why I don't have anything to say except great questions.
Thank you. So why don't we move on to the next topic? Adriana Vivacqua will lead us through a discussion of hybrid Sakai events. So Adriana.
Thank you, Andrew. So hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Adriana Vivacqua, Sakai VP at large, and along with our VP for conference, Susanne Boll, who unfortunately could not be here. We've been working on hybridity at conferences and the implications for Sakai and our family of conferences. So I should say that the CHI post-conference survey and feedback that you all filled out, I'm sure, will be explored in detail by the CHI team, not us. And we look at this feedback just as a starting point for how we can support our other conferences and help define what types of actions Sakai could take to help other conferences transition into hybrid. And while at the same time, we acknowledge that CHI has a scale and dynamics that are not found in our other conferences, as Stacy already noted before me. And I should also note that while there may have been pain points, it's really difficult to take such a large conference into a hybrid space. And that's something that many participants acknowledged. And integrating two modes, on-site and online, is hard and will require more attention, I think, from us. So elements that we take for granted, such as lining up for questions or putting up slides on the display, they work differently in a hybrid mode. And technology, which we are all dependent on for hybrid conferences, may also get in the way. So there might be difficulties caused by the setup or choice platforms or connectivity or whatever. So we would suggest upcoming events. If you're running an event, we take some time to learn from the CHI 22 experience when sorting out your setup and the issues that they encountered and how you might be able to address them and what different issues you might encounter. So based on what we saw, we have some ideas and some suggestions that we already started to come up with, and I'm sure you'll have other ideas. I will have questions like Stacy did at the end. And one of them was creating protocols or guidelines on how to moderate or participate in hybrid sessions for session chairs, student volunteers, authors, panelists, whatever. And if at all possible, run trials or have training beforehand, especially for SVs and session chairs who are in high demand, like they'll be requested for support during the sessions, and have presenters show up early to familiarize with the systems and the technology. And those are some things that people wrote up. And we heard about some suggestions that people gave. Concentrating on fewer platforms, and we should note that different conferences have been adopting different platforms, and often more than one. It's not just it's not exclusive to any particular conference, and this means there's a learning curve for each new conference. So if you have a new thing every time, you have to learn this new thing, and then that generates some stress there. And we should note, though, that the Sakai program app, it has been evolved, and we had many comments and mentions, positive mentions, and it was used apparently by many participants as a jumping off point to sessions. So it was used as sort of a reference for the conference. So we're hoping this will evolve even further. and thinking about how to set up technology to ensure integration between on-site and online, so that they can both get a feel for the room, both the virtual room and the physical room, which is, I guess, where the tension is, who's online, who's there, how many people are there, who's presenting, who's asking, and what's in general, what's going on. I think that's one of the major challenges that we will have moving forward. And then other suggestions that came up: holding sessions to promote conversation and interaction between on-site and online participants, having maybe specific sessions for that, and networking and social events that would integrate these two participants into modes, so to speak. And one thing that did comment that I had not thought about was having a space where on-site participants could connect online to participate remotely, so to speak, in the conference if they wish, and especially if they're online only sessions. So these are some of the suggestions that were made after CHI 22 wrapped up, and I would like to open up the floor now for in case you have comments or ideas or suggestions or questions about specifically what steps we could take to, in the immediate, medium, and long term, to ensure our conferences are hybrid ready. So I'm going to post this, follow here, and feel free to, we set aside about 5 minutes for this. So feel free to raise your hand, post your thoughts, and let us know what you think. Anybody? Yeah, do we have Keith?
Sure. Yeah. So my crazy idea is there must be some HCI researchers building some cool tools to tackle this. Why don't we use these and play with them for our event, right? So that's my crazy idea.
Sounds good. Let's see what Cliff has to say about that.
Yeah, that's unfortunately an idea that probably can't happen, because most HCI researchers are not building with accessibility in mind. And like part of the reasons why we had so many tools is because no tool was accessible to the setup that we needed for the conference. And so we had to stitch together accessible tools for different parts of the experience. So I think when we talk about hybridity, it's also important to make sure that those accessibility concerns come in, because a lot of the platforms that people say, well, why don't you just use GatherTown, or why don't you just use OYE or something like that? Those don't meet our exacting requirements for accessibility in the community. So that has to be part of the discussion when we talk about hybrid options.
Thank you. I'm sure Stacy agrees. Jenny?
Thank you. Thanks for the summary of all the challenges. Just, I guess I don't know how to address this, but the time zone challenges make it really difficult to run a hybrid conference. So yeah, if you're trying to run the hybrid sessions at the same time that the in-person sessions are happening, it's really difficult for those of us on the other side of the world from the conference. And I just wanted to make sure that that's an acknowledged issue. I don't know how to address it though. I acknowledge it's very difficult.
Yeah, that did come up, and we're well aware of that. So it's a challenge. I don't have an answer for you, I guess. But yeah, and maybe there were some suggestions in there about, just trying to think about other dynamics. There are flipped classroom suggestions. So, but I don't know how that would work. So we're looking forward to seeing what other conferences think of. Okay, so, okay. Oh, Cliff and John are chatting. Maybe I should read this out. John asked, is there a source for the exacting requirements mentioned by Cliff? And Cliff mentions Sakai Access has a list. If someone has that list, maybe we can post it somewhere. So do we have a couple minutes more? Or would anybody like to say anything? Otherwise, I'd like to wrap up. And I'd just like to mention one last thing. We're putting together a hybrid working group to follow up on upcoming hybrid activities and conferences. So this is one thing that we're committed to doing, actually following up on the activities of our next conferences and see how well they're doing and what they're coming up with, and curate existing resources, develop guidelines and ways to support our conferences in this process, and think about all the issues that come up, have come up, and that will come up for sure. And we'll be posting an open call for volunteers in the coming weeks. So please be on the lookout for that and do volunteer when you see it. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us. Let's say KINC. And back to Andrew. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Adriana. If you have additional questions for Adriana or for that matter, Stacy, then please do put them in the chat and we'll continue to chat. So at this point, I would like to go on to the next topic for today's meeting, which is safety at Sakai events. And Kale, maybe you can now take over.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so Neha, I wasn't sure if you wanted to present some of the results from the survey or if I should actually just talk about safety in general. Do you have a preference for that?
I can just quickly summarize. I think this is a blog post that would be upcoming, but we did have so the EC had requested information about attendees at Kai, their experiences or thoughts, perceptions around harassment at the conference. And this is important input that we're using to discuss recommendations and next steps, which Kale is going to be talking about, and we're working with CARES on that. I can just quickly say that the types of things that came up have given us stuff to think about. So one thing that I received input on from people at the conference was also just our alcohol policy that we had discussed in a meeting recently and then voted on. And this was basically the EC saying that any events that are funded by the EC starting July 1st will, and not be providing free alcohol. And that was something that was discussed because it was also a policy at the conference to not be providing free alcohol. And, it turns out, no surprise, there are lots of feelings and opinions around this decision. And some people feel that it's not enough. Some people feel that it's too much. But for the purpose of discussing safety, we really want to be thinking also about what more we could be doing. Certainly, it's not enough to cover safety. Also at the town hall, this was a question that came up, right? What is Sakai doing around safety at conferences? Because right now, it's not doing enough. And this has come up in the past with regards to what purview Sakai Cares has, and also what is the scope within which it can operate given ACM's restrictions. So anyway, these are conversations to continue, but I think, let me see if there's anything quickly that I can mention. So just talking about, experiences of people from different cultures, experiences of student volunteers, basically people who are more junior in the community. We've been hearing for some time that, and even in prior surveys, that there are various issues that arise ranging from microaggressions to just more serious harassment concerns. And there's issues around awareness that came up. So just how do we make CARES more visible at conferences? How do we make it safer for people to come up to conference leadership or community leadership and say, well, this is what happened. Also, if conference chairs are taking action, then, and this is maybe something that Cliff, if you could talk briefly about, but if there is action that is taken, like how can we make it um, more acceptable for conference chairs to be taking action if something happens, right? And this is something that came up in a meeting that we had with our steering committee chairs and conference chairs from conferences. But if people don't know that this is action that they could take, they may not take it. So that's, you know, there's a wide range of input that we've received on this issue, but a lot of it is focused on communication, taking action, what action can be taken, how do we build a culture and awareness around these things. And then there are just very constructive suggestions. So for instance, bystander training, or provide educational material, or repeat the code of conduct several times, make cares more visible, or have contacts who can connect. And then also in terms of improving access, so not just information, but access to better care at conferences. How can we provide physical, digital options for people to make reporting easier? How do we create spaces for anonymous reporting? Is that allowed? And if it's not allowed within the CARES remit, then what else could we do? Okay, so I think with that, I've actually gone over all of the points that had come up. And so Kale, back to you to talk about next steps.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll be quick here. We have now passed the formation of an equity committee. So that's fantastic. With the equity committee established, we're now currently planning several collaborative efforts for release across SIGCHI conferences. And all of these are directed at informing and standardizing safety at SIGCHI events, as Neha mentioned. So first, we're beginning what'll probably be a 3-month-long project of gathering data from past equity chairs, general chairs, and official reports on conferences under SIGCHI's umbrella. And this is to better understand pain points and snags across the SIGCHI events and to standardize safety and equity at our conferences. So the results of this, we want to lead to the creation of equity checklists, key considerations, offerings around equity. And that's just ensure that we're building on a culture of inclusion and not losing these methods of keeping our community safer, which equity chairs are currently constantly inventing and innovating around. But you know, we're not seeing that sort of standardization. So we're also working with mentorship and volunteering chairs to create the just better coordination and training of equity chairs. That's to ease onboarding and also standardize handoffs. That's ensuring that sort of continuity of equity related offerings. So we're at the discussion stage and early organizational stage of bystander intervention and allyship program training for chairs, SVs, and hopefully any interested attendees. And that'll be in collaboration with SIGCHI Cares and a few different evaluation and training programs that we're looking for, or sort of speaking to right now. We're also in the early stages of developing a decolonization equity subcommittee, and that's to just better address ways that we do things like site selection, ways that we can be better hosts, ways that we can further engender healthier reciprocal relationships with the cultures present and hopefully more present in our community. We are also at the early stages of determining how to better quality and sense check keynote content, things like venue staff, CHI adjacent events. So things that maybe aren't under the SIGCHI umbrella, but are happening because people are coming to, say, a SIGCHI event. So yeah, as Neha mentioned, as Cliff might be able to speak to a little bit, within the last couple of years, a few new precedents have been set for how we can create these systems of accountability within SIGCHI, between how ACM's discrimination harassment policy has been set, between how reporting and CARES is currently working and the sanctions database is working. We are making some ground on accountability. We also clearly do have much farther to go. But toward that, we have been, even discussing alternative, more maybe radical and complicated ways of doing this. So maybe that could look like a restorative justice panel or subcommittee. During future EC times, I'll be updating all of us on the progress of each of these enormous tasks. And I look forward to, myself seeing tangible takeaways at each of our SIGCHI conferences on these. But with a little bit, just a couple minutes, because I know we're running over time a little bit here. We're a data-driven community, and our conference surveys are one of the most responsive ways of communicating needs. So I'd like for the next few minutes, if y'all can help me just brainstorm 1 to 3 equity-centered questions that you'd like to see standardized on all post-conference surveys. Yeah, if you could have 1 to 3 questions on each survey for a conference that is equity-centered. Anyone have any thoughts about what that question might look like?
Is this about
perhaps-
safety?
Yeah,
Or
safety and just getting feedback from the community on where safety is, outside of what we've heard and been communicated, like that's been communicated to us. What kinds of questions might we build around equity and safety for these exit surveys?
So I see that Cliff is making a point that ACM defines safety as physical safety. And I just wanted to mention, Kale, perhaps what you're suggesting is that people write these down in the chat or get in touch with you or speak up right now if they wish, I assume, right? All of these are good options.
Yeah, absolutely. I can put my email in the chat as well, just kale.passmore@gmail.com if you'd like to also engage further with me on this. But Cliff, I see
go
you have
ahead.
your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to talk. I don't mean to talk as much, and I know we're over time. So this year at the conference, we removed 2 people for harassment issues. This was a significant change in practice from previous conferences. The typical process has been that if there is an incidence of harassment, the mechanism is that you report that person to the ACM, there goes through a process, there's a litigation, et cetera, and then there's some sanction against that person, which happens rarely enough. So this year, my team and I, we made the decision that we were going to flex a clause that does allow general chairs to remove a person for the safety of participants. That ACM, like I mentioned, chat, ACM has always use that around physical safety, like if somebody becomes violent or something like that. We decided that psychological safety was just as important. And so we reinterpreted the ACM policy to give the general chairs broad rights to remove anybody from the conference who they think is threatening the psychological safety of participants at that conference. As far as I know, that's the first time that's been done with an ACM conference. I had to run up to the Pat in terms of being the COO of ACM, and there's a lot of phone calls I had to go back and forth throughout the day. And then you always have logistical problems, like how does that actually happen when you boot somebody from a conference, and what does that look like? And there's all sorts of issues around that. But I do think we should encourage our general chairs to be a little more tyrannical in ensuring the safety of the people around them.
I
have sorry, quick question. Cliff, if you could just touch on this. So what happens in the future? Does what happens at one CHI impact what happens at the next CHI with regards to the people that you kicked out?
Potentially. So what we did is, for the 2 incidences, we had the people who reported them also submit harassment claims to the ACM. And so it's the ACM that can block a person from multiple conferences, and maybe SIGCHI. I don't know, like if you wanted to, that'd be between you and ACM, I think. As far as I can interpret, the general chair can only affect the conference they've been put in charge of. So I was just making a decision for CHI 2022 and then passing the rest of it on to the ACM.
So Celine, would you like to go ahead, or would you like us to read it? Go ahead, please.
Sure. Hi. So Cliff, I was just curious, and Neha and everybody else. First of all, I just want to say I think that's great that that step was taken, and I'm really glad that we're going to be able to test the psychological safety aspect of this clause. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm co-chair of the CARES committee. My question was really about does exercising that clause change if we're not holding the conference in the US? Do we have any sense of that, or does it not matter? I mean, my sense was that it was because the event was considered a private event. So that means that the chair of the conference has the right to ask somebody to leave if they are not abiding by what they agreed to when they registered. And so I would think that that wouldn't matter, that that could happen then anywhere, but I was wondering if we had any thoughts on sort of global jurisdiction issues conflicting with that.
And that's a really interesting question. I would have made the same decision, no matter what country we were in, but the person pushed back, which neither person pushed back on being expelled. If they did, it might change by global jurisdiction about how much you can really, could I have security remove them? So that's a great question.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Cliff and Simone. Thanks, Cliff, for bringing this up, and thank you for, I know that this must have been at the very least an uncomfortable position for you to be in, but of course you were helping people who are in a much more uncomfortable position. So thank you for taking that step. Kale, I think that, I'm not sure we got to the questions that you were hoping for, but you do have your email. So please, everybody get in touch with Kale. And maybe Kale, can we move, so we have some open calls, and I believe, Kale, you're one of the people who have an announcement, or am I getting that wrong?
No,
I have a list here, but it's.
You are correct.
Oh. Okay, go ahead then, please.
So we do still have the open call for members to join the equity committee. Right now, there are a few more central positions. So as I sort of mentioned in that recap, that should give you an idea of what several of the main projects we're looking to sort of take on are. We're not looking for the sort of open call here to be, if you're volunteering your time with us on the equity committee, we don't need you to be incredibly overburdened by the time or effort constraints here. Helping out in any capacity is really, really appreciated. So you can reach me via that email through the open call link. And yeah, then express interest in sort of what direction or capacity or maybe what subcommittee you might like to be working on or with me in. It's fun stuff, I promise.
Thank you. Pejman, would you like to also make an announcement?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Pejman. I'm Vice President for Publication at SIGCHI. I think we talked about the publication committee that we are forming in the previous meeting, as well as at the video that we presented at CHI. This is just a, I guess, quick reminder that we are forming the publication committees and we are looking for members. There are, I would say, 3 key initiatives that this committee will be kind of taking. One is to support our conference leaders for all our conferences with their publication pipelines and questions, which is usually around interpretation of ACM's policies regarding publication. The other is to support our authors and community members. That's through courses that we are creating regarding writing papers or reviewing and things related to publication. And the third one is the future of publication at SIGCHI. So there are loads of discussion around what sort of format we need to, looking at, like you probably saw that recently we are publishing our paper as HTML as well, and there are kind of more push towards that direction. It may also include other formats, such as including maybe videos as a publishable material or other forms. So there are going to be initiatives on looking at those future of publication at SIGCHI. So for those, we are looking for people who are interested and have experience potentially from serving as part of in publication related role in our conferences to be a member of SIGCHI publication committee. So yeah, that's kind of, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about this and make sure to mention that we have open call and looking for members, community members to participate in this committee. If there is any questions, I'm happy to answer. In terms of submitting interest, I think we are using a submittable link. Maybe someone else who has the link can quickly put it in the chat, but we can quickly find it. Yeah, there is a link to go through. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, let's put the link in as we're continuing to talk. And then Adriana, did you want to mention?
Yeah, just
think
reiterate, yes,
Yes.
Real quick. Yeah, so I already mentioned we're putting together a hybrid working group if all goes well. Call will be out next week, and then we'll give folks, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks to sign up. We'll advertise it, put the call out for the working group in all the lists and Twitter and all the other channels. And we're looking for a diverse set of people from people who have organized and participated and different, who can bring in different views to the process and look at different aspects of the hybridity problem. And we're excited to be doing this work, and we hope some of you will volunteer. Thank you.
Very good. And I do see a couple of other names here in my notes for open calls. Shalom and Luigi. I'm not sure if anybody has information on that or.
I can speak to that. So there's the Sakai Development Fund and the Travel Awards, and so basically community support mechanisms. And that's a committee that's been shrinking over time. And so Luigi, who leads that, is trying to recruit for those two. So if you'd like to help with just allocating Sakai resources for various community projects, then that's a committee that you might be interested in. Another is the Futuring Sakai Committee, which is basically inviting students and early career members of our community to participate around projects, to think about Sakai futures. That call is still out. And then we are going to start looking at the award cycle for next year. And awards nominations are only due at the end of the year, but there is room for people to be volunteering or thinking about volunteering in the review committees, and also for thinking about various other awards related processes. So this is going to be a dedicated call just for awards, and it'll be coming. So in the next few weeks, we'll probably share it in the next meeting as well. But these are some of the upcoming opportunities for you to be thinking about, and we'll be sharing information also on our Sakai members list. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Neha. So with that, I would like to open the floor up for additional comments, additional updates, either from the community members who are here today, or
Did anyone else lose Andrew? So I think we could go ahead and assume that he meant, are there any questions? Let's take some questions or comments from the audience.
So I guess I was interrupted by my internet. Anyway, as I was trying to say, if anybody has additional updates, this is a good time, or additional questions or suggestions. Looking forward to hearing those.
I don't know if you can see Andrew, but Cliff has an update. Maybe you missed that message because you were.
I probably did. Go ahead, Cliff, please.
Oh, just the Kaya Steering Committee is moving to get rid of PDFs. So we'll see if we can push that for next year, if not for sure by 2024.
So then when we go to the DL, so what does killing PDFs actually mean?
That authors won't have to generate and iterate on that PDF that comes back from Aptera.
Right.
that it basically becomes just an HTML document is the primary output of the report. Authors can still create a PDF that would go into supplementary materials, like author provided materials, if they're fussy DIS types who want to, tweak every edge of their PDF. But that'll save, we estimate, something around 1,500 hours of Chi researcher time, in terms of not having to fuss with PDFs and Aptera and all that stuff.
Nice.
And we're hoping other conferences will follow suit with our bold move.
Thank you. Stacy.
Can I just add that that would be a lovely boon to accessibility? The PDFs are atrociously inaccessible. It's a very complicated, expensive process to ask authors or third parties to make them accessible. And so I support this. Eleanor agrees. She's angry at PDFs.
Eleanor is expressing how I feel about PDFs.
Very good. So I think we can wrap up at this point. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have additional comments, please reach out. And we will see you probably in about a month, I believe, for these monthly meetings. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.